Hey everybody, it's Brian Burns and welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Today, me and Chad are going to be talking about nice to haves and must haves. Now, what are you selling? Is it a nice to have or a must have? Now, if you don't believe it's a must have, that's the number one problem. Because if you don't believe it, how is anyone else going to? So we're going to talk through it because everything that I've ever sold, people obviously didn't have it. I usually sold brand new products into a brand new market, and you have to convince somebody why it's a must have. Because nice to haves get pushed to the bottom of the list. And we have to focus on really what is the problem that you solve and what is the impact of them not taking action. And then play time travel games to have them focus on the future if they don't take action today. So I think this is a great topic. I think everybody can relate to this at one level or another. I think there's a lot of products out there. There's so many products out there. And actually, I want to pitch the other podcast, the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast, because this week, me and Chris Orlob are talking about competitive selling. And I'm sharing some of the strategies from my book. He's sharing the scientific research based off of their historical data. And we're going to discuss the different things, including the one thing. The one thing strategy is by far the most powerful competitive strategy when implemented right. Make sure you listen to that. It'll drop a day after this. Not sure when you're listening to this, but look for it there, B2B revenue. It's kind of targeted towards leaders, but reps will get just as much out of it. Because if you're in a highly competitive sale where they're looking at you and alternatives and doing nothing, I'm sure we're all in that at some level or another. You're going to get a lot out of that, as well as the research that they've done on their website. Now, they've got enormous amounts of resources. And the great thing about it is it's just not anecdotal. You know, listening to somebody who's sold for 25, 30 years is great, but it's also good to get the actual science behind it, the historical data. Doesn't mean it's exact. It just means it's a great reference point because each product is different, each market's different, each account's different. We're selling to people, not personas. Companies are just groups of people. But having some sense of what really is mathematically shown is very valuable. So make sure you're going to gong.io and signing up for their blog. Chris is doing amazing work there. We're going to be doing a lot of episodes about their content. If you're a sales manager, their product is really going from a nice to have to a must have. Because let's face it, as sales managers, what's the holy grail? It's getting feedback of the quality of a sales call that is unbiased and proven against historical data. And as reps, we should want that. A lot of us are sensitive and don't like feedback, but the only way to get better is to get a little feedback. And let me tell you a story. I got a chess coach last couple of weeks because my game was kind of stuck at this level for almost a year. I play on my phone, and I was getting frustrated because why aren't I progressing? You know, I'd win one, I'd lose two, I'd win two, I'd lose three, and I couldn't get to the next level. And I said, well, why don't I take my own advice and get a chess coach? So I got this guy, and we play online, and we play online, and we talk to each other. And he asked me, well, why are you moving there? What are you thinking? What do you think I'm thinking? What's your strategy? What do you think my strategy is? And it's not that selling is trying to beat somebody, although you're constantly beating the alternatives for their time and their money. But we are trying to think multiple steps ahead if you want to prevent bad things from happening, or you can just react. Sit around going, why'd they go quiet? I don't know. But this has been a game changer for me. And it's just a pastime for me, but it's really a powerful metaphor for what the complex sale is really like. Because you have to have a strategy. You have to think multiple steps in advance. You got to think about what the competitors are thinking about. You got to think what the customer is thinking about and all the influencers within the account and what they're thinking about. So let's get Chad on the line here. But before I do, I want to make sure you're checking out Co-Video. Video is my superpower of 2018. video emails, video on LinkedIn. It's blowing up the podcast. We're getting almost 1,000 new listeners a week now, which is more than doubled in the last month, just because of the videos that I'm doing. And what is happening is people are getting to know me, getting to get a sense of who I am. And if it matches, they listen to the podcast. If it doesn't, they throw me some hate and whatever. But what I'm trying to do is give people little tidbits of either the podcast or my ideas or my feedback on my partner's content to make sure you are aware of the best stuff out there. I'm trying to keep them under a minute and a half so that you can do it while you're in line for coffee and stuff. But make sure you're checking out Code Video, because video email is the way to break through. It's the way to tell your story, to engage with people, to connect with them as a human being, because at the end of the day, that's really what this is, and that's never going to change. So let's get Chad on the line, and at the end, I'll sum up the episode as well as give you an update on the courses. Hey, Chad, let's talk about how do you make a product a must-have instead of a nice-to-have? Because so many people look at what we sell as a nice-to-have instead of I've really got to get it. Anything in your life recently that at one time was a nice-to-have that's now a must-have?
Yeah, I set this one up for you before we hit record. So some of you guys may not remember, but there are actually days where we didn't have cell phones, let alone phones that are this damn smart or connected. I've actually misplaced my phone the other day, and I went, it's typically in my back pocket, and I reach around to grab it out of my back pocket. It's not there, and literally the cold sweats start. And so this object, which used to be, if you can remember back in the day, the big purse phones, I called them purse phones, bag phones. They were massive, right? Yeah. And that was a nice to have. But now in the world that we live in, and as connected as we all are, smartphones, especially in B2B, are critical. So now it's not a nice to have. You have to have it to even, get on the field, so to speak. And so the question becomes, how do you effectively do that with a product that may not yet be viewed by your prospects as a have to have rather than just something that might help a little bit?
And I think we all get wrapped around the axle thinking that we have a nice to have instead of a must have. And it's just a matter of time. There's so many things. It's like, I was walking around with my earbuds, and I remember thinking, oh, that's a luxury. I can just, use my wired ones. But it was within 2 days of me getting them where I was like, I can't imagine living without these now. Because I actually sleep with them. I listen to podcasts and stuff. And with a wire, you're going to strangle yourself.
There's a health risk.
There's a health risk. But everyone, it was like a luxury. Who's going to pay $160 for these? I bought them the day they came out. I was like, they look goofy, but I thought they keep falling out. They don't. I love them. And as soon as the batteries were dying a little bit, I bought a spare part or spare pair. And there was one morning where I couldn't find one of them, and I was freaking out.
You get to that point, right? You get to that point. So when you're selling your product, we all think, unless, I've seen people delude themselves into believing that what they're selling, this new product they're selling, is everybody has to have it. But that has to have it isn't predicated on your perspective. It's the buyer or the person you're selling to saying, you know what? I can't live without this anymore. So if you think about, big data analytics, right? Everybody was collecting big data, and there's data lakes and all of these massive server installations. Great. You got all this data. So what are you going to do with it? Well, you didn't have to have overlays that could do the data analytics. You just had to have a room full of interns back in the day when this started. Now, having all of that data and not having some way to aggregate it, to analyze it, to do it quickly, almost in real time so that you can inform your business, that's almost become a must-have. The speed of business continually increases. So when you first started selling that stuff, it was nice to have, but hey, you know what? I got a room full of interns. I'm paying $6 an hour. They can crunch some numbers for me. Now I have to have that in order to stay competitive. Well, the goal of the salesperson is to help those people realize that faster, sooner, quicker, so that they can get that in, show them the kind of impacts it can have, and show them what else they can be doing and better spending their time on.
And that's it. And I think you have to really dig into the problem that you solve, not the function of your product. So if, like what we do, we go into an account and you go, what do you do? What problem do you solve? We make, more sales faster and bigger, essentially, is what we do. Everyone has that problem. Okay, so does everybody need it, or is it a nice to have? Well, we got to make sure that they turn it into a must-have, because either you're going to do it or your competitor does it. How many times do you hear a VP of sales goes, we never lose to the competition? That's a pretty easy objection to handle, right? Okay, well, what do all these companies get their money from? Is it charity? Is it taxpayers? Is it alternative minimum income or something? What's going on here? Well, they have some existing accounts and everything. Well, where'd they get them? So I think that you have to have that fear of missing out, where somebody else is going to get that revenue. And my number 2 is explaining how the world has changed. That, maybe before this existed, you didn't need it, but now it's here. Other people have it. Are you going to miss out or get late to the party and not have it? I mean, how
without
many
a doubt.
Yeah, if you ever see somebody with a flip phone and they think they're cool, you're like, okay, get an Uber with that. What's that?
Yeah.
What's the number?
I'll meet you on the other side of town. When you get there.
Right, yeah. Oh, you check your email or text somebody, and you're like, see how cool you are now.
Well, I mean, it's an important point, right? Because if you think about anybody who's worked in an organization, I know we've both worked in organizations of varying sizes, but when you're inside that organization, when you're inside that company, you're completely focused on that forest. You're completely focused on what's going on in that organization. Maybe it's, hey, there was a reorg over in the marketing department, or hey, we just brought on some new customer success people, or there's all this stuff that keeps you focused inside your own organization, what's going on with your company. The best sales reps are the ones that keep an eye on the markets and the industries that their customers are in, so they can provide those insights. Insight selling is not new. How you deliver those insights, we could have a whole podcast on that. But the fact of the matter is, you want to be able to be that bit of a Sherpa, right? Because all of this information is available. You want to be able to help the people that you're focused on, help them understand how these changes are going to impact them, even if they're not currently aware of them. So when we do conversations like this, we say, hey, here are the emerging trends that we're seeing in your space and the impacts this could have on your organization. Just curious, are you guys thinking about this? How do you plan on addressing it? Or is it even important in your strategic view of the business? But having those conversations, having that information, being able to provide that perspective, it's a great way to change the perspective of the prospect so that what they thought was nice is now a must-have.
And that's it, and it doesn't take long, because my whole career was based on what I call this transfer of ownership. It was getting the first dose of heroin or cocaine into their blood system. It's not a healthy analogy, but it's something that hopefully you can't relate to, but you can understand. I would basically get the product installed or integrated into their system, and I'd start showing it to them and then get people using it. And once that transfer of ownership took place, they would cry at the idea of losing it, because they were so much more productive. Their lifestyle was so much easier. They had this capability of doing things. And I remember one summer, I spent the whole summer trying to get this air traffic control man-machine interface connected up with this computer that I was selling. And I was I was selling to IBM, competing against IBM. Imagine how easy that was, right? The idea of IBM using anyone else's product but IBM's was just unthinkable. But what we could do was take a change and 1/1000th the time that they could do on theirs. And it was just so antiquated on theirs. And the engineers were like, we can't even use this product. And I would be there without moving any software. I could make the change, boop. And they go, well, how long is that going to take? I go, it's done. And I hit the run key, and it would run and show up on the man-machine interface. And the project manager was like, holy smokes, I'm going to get fired for buying this stuff, but I have to buy it.
Well, I mean that's a great point, right? Sometimes they just don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And so, it's the FOMO, the fear of missing out is great. The awareness of what's going on in the market. But hey, did you even know this was possible?
Yes.
Right. And this is where I think I'd call it like sales, 201 or 301 level kind of ninja stuff. Because what happens, what I see too many reps get caught up in is they're like, okay, now I'm talking about my product because they didn't know this was possible. And rather than only kind of dip their toe into the feature set to show them what's possible, they all of a sudden are down deep and losing people because they're talking about feature sets or other elements of the product that the person doesn't care about. Yeah. So you have to be really, really, to get to that point where it's a need, you got to zone in and know exactly what you're bringing to market that they didn't think was possible. Show them just that to keep the sales velocity moving forward.
Well, I mean, even back in your career at PTC, I mean, they had this model of a sale that was just fantastic, where they could show this capability that nobody else had, right, where they had the 3D modeling and everything, and the engineers would just flip out. They would be like,
oh, yeah.
It was like... That
was awesome. So I remember when we did, so I worked before there, I was at a company called Raindrop Geomagic, and we hooked up to a bunch of white light scanners. And it was, the only store that I know that actually installed this was a Levi's store in San Francisco. But we had actually built the software so that if you went into the booth, and you grab these two handles, it did a white light scan. And we're talking, this is 15 years ago. Now people probably wouldn't have such a big aha with it. But you go into this booth, you grab these handles, white light scanner goes up. And then all of a sudden the software extrapolates all your measurements and tells you when your custom jeans are going to be delivered. Now, that aha moment at the time, that was great. But then really quickly behind it, you could see the prospects doing the calculation of, well, crap, what is this going to cost? It wasn't until they realized the premium they could charge for the jeans and all of the logistics that they were saving on shipping and all of their back end and stores and stuff before they started to realize ROI was holy crap, was really great. So we're actually going to invest and do it. They only installed one at Levi's that I know of, but NASCAR used it to do analysis on the flows of their cars. And it was pretty cool, but people had never thought it was possible at that point to do that. And so that was great. The next step became, okay, now that you know it's possible, let's talk about what it means. And having that ability to switch from, product specific feature functionality and tying that to specific business outcome is another way to help them move up that chain of nice to, hey, I can't live without this.
And that's it. And telling the story of another account like you just did, it gives people that journey and gets them away from, oh, this is just a nice to have. It's a trinket. It's a novelty. It's something put in the corner at a trade show or something, as opposed to something that's core to their business. And, that air traffic control thing, we were that nice to have. They did not buy our product originally to use it. They bought it because their customer and their competitor had bought one. And they just wanted to be compliant. They didn't want to really use it. My job was to get them to use it, and they ended up, buying $5 million of equipment, investing $30 million in the business, and eventually buying it. And all of a sudden, it really, not only was it a must-have, it was the core piece of their whole infrastructure. And
well, yeah,
I think
and there's other ways to do that too. I mean, if you think about when they buy it, and I really like that idea of using. So if I'm going after, a security company, and I know that security company, one of their largest clients is, let's say, FedEx, right? They do all the security, at door access monitoring and stuff for a distribution center, and FedEx is one of their biggest clients. And I'm trying to sell them something, going to FedEx and saying, hey, I believe we can provide this to your customer, to this data, to this warehouse, and it's going to provide you, FedEx, with these types of returns. So then FedEx turns around and says, hey, Mr. Security Company, you need to buy this solution from these guys because I want what it's going to give me as a result of you owning it, right? So that client pressure is another great way to go, okay, now if my top clients are asking for it, I definitely need to take it a little bit more seriously. It's not a nice to have anymore. I've got, one of my top clients who's saying they want the outcome that this product can provide. It's a little bit more involved strategy, and it's definitely for more of a complex sale. but getting that kind of building that peer, I don't want to say peer pressure, but building that support
the ecosystem
from the ecosystem is critical.
Yeah. And that was my secret when I sold public sector, is that most reps would hang around with the system integrators or they'd hang around with the government. I hanged around with both of them. And I would basically tell each of them that the other person thinks we're the best. And one of the largest deals of my career was that they bid our whole solution because I told them that the customer wanted it. I went and talked to the customer and I said, these guys have got it figured out because they're going to be the most productive. And they won this like $50 million contract, and it was like a $5 million company. And they just blew up. And I think reps don't really think that way. I think reps think transactionally instead of transformationally.
Oh, I'm stealing that.
Hey, come on. Hey, it's copywritten.
I'll attribute it. TM.
Attributions.
I'll attribute, but I mean, I think that's a great point. We have a tendency to think, okay, and honestly, a lot of the sales methodologies that people are trained in teach them to do this. This is the step I'm in now.
Yeah.
What do I have to do to get to the next step? Rather than how do I look at this holistically, and how do I look at all of the levers I can pull? Not necessarily what's going to make me more effective, to get to the next step in my sales process, but how is that account buying? What is influencing that account? How do I find the people inside of that organization that are going to be the most influenced, that are going to be the most open to those types of conversations? Strategic thinking, we call it, we used to, back when I was doing a lot of interviews and stuff and hiring for teams, we used to call it spatial reasoning. So it was 3D thinking. How could you think outside of the box normally rather than making it like this, hey, guess what? I just had an out of the box thought, and that's my one for the month. How do you think about total environment and the total market space and impacts that could be affecting these accounts? And I find that most people can get there, but it isn't a default. And most of the tools that we put in place today kind of keep them at the wrong end of the spectrum in terms of that type of thinking.
That's it. And I think we're modeling a lot of companies that don't really fit the model of our company. I think we see one company be super successful and we think, oh, we just got to copy what they do. And that might work, but it might not. I think you really have to understand what will cause people to buy this product. And just sitting with one champion or one mobilizer typically, isn't as effective as really getting around and understanding the total influence of the account and what people are really going to care about. And I think we've kind of lost that view of sales because we're trying to reduce the cost of sales instead of increase the total sales.
It's one of the top things we always hear, right? I need my deal sizes to be bigger.
Yeah, they want their deal sizes to be bigger, but they don't want to pay. They want to hire college kids to get them there.
Right.
And it's
there's a company I won't name because they're here in my backyard, and I was talking to one of the executives that had recently been put in place to run their sales, and it's in the AI B2B space, it's a fairly well-known brand. But I was talking to this person, and they're like, yeah, I said, here's a candidate that I know. I mean, I've worked with this person. I know they're a strategic thinker. Here you go. But they're not cheap, and wouldn't even take the time to have the conversation because like, no, I can just go get 3 college kids for that. Yeah. And I'm like, it's the same argument we used to have back in the day when I worked at a body shop where we were selling top-end programming talent before programming talent became commoditized. And it's the same argument. You can put 100 monkeys in a room and eventually you'll get Shakespeare, or you can go get Shakespeare and have it by the end of the day. And it may cost you a little bit more, but then what you can do afterwards, right, is really what we're talking about. So what's the management overhead of hiring 3 kids out of college where you have to train them each way, you have to hold their hand? Chances are if they're coming out of college, they don't have the emotional fortitude to deal with the type of rejection they're going to get because they were told they were special from the day they were born, right? You're going to have all of these challenges hiring that versus hiring the ones that can actually make things happen.
And I never understood that either, because how many times did you work at a company where you had the same comp plan as an entry-level person?
Yeah.
I remember an SE became a rep, and he had the same base I had, and the same OTE. And, here I was with 20 years experience crushing it. And all of a sudden, there was no difference. And management would be like, it's too complicated to have it be different. I go, does every engineer have the same base and target? Of course not. What's the difference?
If you can do it over there, I mean, and that's just it, right? The incentive plans are critical, and they should be tailored. Again, this is where I think some sales execs, organizations, I don't want to pin it on the sales exec because I've seen CFOs get in the way of this too. Yeah. The CFO wants it to be simple as possible. Sales execs would probably most likely tailor it to the different levels or different focuses that they have. Increases complexity in the CFO. I've heard them say it over and over. Oh, well, those guys are just going to find a way to game the system. Well, yeah.
Do you think? Well, that's it. I mean, do you think this nice to have versus must have is mostly mindset on the rep side? If they stick with the, I'm selling a nice to have instead of a must have.
Well, I think your perspective, it comes across, right? If you honestly believe you're selling a nice to have, it's going to come across. The person that you're talking to is going to eventually catch on to that vibe, right? I think mindset is probably the largest asset a sales rep can invest in developing. Yeah. And if you can see what kind of impacts this can have, if you really believe, hey, you know what? This is going to change the way business is done, or it's going to provide this. That passion, that authenticity, that emotional resonance comes across as you're structuring it or putting it on the trellis of truly intellectual, strategic thought for the account. I think mindset's critical, and it's one I don't think we pay enough attention to.
Yeah, and I think it becomes a crutch, and instead of just come up with the 3 reasons why you're a must-have. Because everything, do we always have to have a car? We didn't live without it. We lived without a car for 16 years at least, right?
Right.
Do we need 2 houses? Do we need all these other stuff? Do we need a 70-inch TV? And 300 channels and gigabit internet? Sorry, I was getting a little worked up there on the Ethernet thing. But I hope you enjoyed that. Really sit down and make a list of why your product is a must-have. And first, convince yourself why people are just crazy if they don't get it. What is going to happen to them if they don't act now? And once you get that, focus on the problem that you solve and get them focused on the problem that you solve. Get them talking about it. Get the impact of not solving it, not addressing it now, and the cost that it will incur over time, and start accelerating that time frame to now. That's what makes a must-have. And speaking of must-have, have you signed up for training yet? And it's not so much training. And I like the chess analogy because I knew how to play chess. I didn't know how to play at a higher level. And even my coach is only a couple of notches above me on execution, but great at coaching chess players. He's a student of it. He's studied grandmasters. Of course, he's better than me in everything and more experience, but he's very good at getting you focused on the right things and finding your weaknesses and strengthening them up, really getting you to think about how to win that game. And that's what I want to do in the sales training stuff. It's not about teaching you how to sell. You know how to sell. It's trying to get you better at selling, because selling is something that's not binary. It's not like riding a bike. You either know it or you don't know it. If you have that view, how are you going to get better? You're not going to get better. You're going to stay at the same level. If you don't get better, you're not going to increase your salary, or you're not going to increase your commissions. And that's what it's all about, especially here in Q4. So make sure you go into b2brevenue.com, look under the training tab, check out the courses. Don't schedule a time unless you're really serious and you're going to show up. That would be critical there. Also, make sure you're checking out the Sales Questions podcast. Feel free to submit questions via LinkedIn. And if you're on LinkedIn, you better be, stop by and follow the company page, which is Brutal Truth about Sales and Selling podcast. I put out funny videos all day, every day, so you get to see them, little humor about sales and selling. Also, make sure you connect with me or follow me on LinkedIn. I put out great content there. That's where I put out my videos as well. Also, make sure you check out the show notes with all the partner deals. The major ones are Nudge and Pipedrive. They're doing great work. If you're not checking them out, looking at their blogs, using that product, and you say, I know you got this, you got that, but you got to have your own stuff. You got to have your own way of prospecting and monitoring your territory, your total addressable market, whether it's you have your own company or you work for somebody. It's too much browsing. Why not have it all come to you? Why not have this great system to keep track of all your contacts, your prospects, all the people you know within your ecosystem, have it connected up with your email. You get 1 month free to try it out with the Brutal Truth coupon. Make sure you do that. If you happen to talk to them and their support, make sure you tell them you heard about it on the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. That's it. I really appreciate you listening. Make sure you're checking out my interview this week with Chris Orlob on the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. And if you see some of my videos, give it a little thumbs up, would you? Write a little comment. Tell me you're listening to the podcast. That would be helpful. We'll see you next time.